And then to close out chapter 7, I'll just touch on a few of the other topics he brings up that I just didn't really have much to say about, honestly, so I'll just touch on them really fast. So he talks about exploring afterlife environments, which sounded cool, but I don't feel like I've had any direct experience of that myself in my own practice, so not much to say there. He talks about homecoming events, which, again, is something I don't have any experience with, but it did sound really neat. So homecoming events are basically where you find people or dream characters or whatever, people in the OBE state, right? And they basically identify themselves as being lost or deceased, and then you basically assist them, you know, into the afterlife, for like into what he talks about is oftentimes to show up to him as like a bright light where you can like lead him to the light, but then the bright light itself like wouldn't ever let him enter into it. Kind of like the barrier zone stuff we talked about a couple videos ago, but nonetheless, I thought that sounded neat. He talks about something called the H-band, which I guess Robert Monroe talked a lot about. The H-band is the uncontrolled thoughts and emotional patterns emanating from all human consciousness, and he actually talks about how this is a common place for OBEers to run into a lot, which I thought sounded neat, but nothing I have direct experience of myself per se. And then lastly, he talks about repository fields of consciousness. And this part, I kind of do have something to say on. At least to me, it read a lot like hypnagogic type of work, or specifically like the Salvador Dali, Thomas Edison method, which, look it up. I made a video on it a long time ago. I'm sure you could just Google it, but here's what he has to say about it. So repository fields of consciousness are mostly based on information and knowledge. There is no impression of interacting with other sentient consciousnesses. Rather, you are accessing information and knowledge seemingly stored inside a wild field of energy, etc., etc. Then later on, he has this to say. Accessing information in the repository fields does not appear to be an illusory phenomenon, so it doesn't appear to be that hard to do or access, just like hypnagogia is. There are many reported instances throughout history in which artists, inventors, intellectuals, and scientists access these repository fields of consciousness, usually while drifting between sleeping and waking. So again, exactly like hypnagogic type stuff and hypnopompic stuff. He points out, now then he brings up a bunch of stuff that a lot of lucid dreamers like to bring up, kind of touting the potential of the practice. So he says how the song Yesterday came to Paul McCartney in this state. The structures of DNA molecules were discovered in this state. Charles Dickinson wrote a lot of his poetry while in that state. So basically just a lot of the stuff that, a lot of lucid dreamers will talk about too as well, which kind of got me thinking. Like, I thought a lot of this stuff was discovered like in a classic lucid dream, not necessarily in the Salvador Dali, Thomas Edison type hypnagogic approach. It kind of makes me want to look back into it and see what it is. But at least for me personally, now I've always considered exploring hypnagogia in particular, because that's where I spend most of my time. I'm a lot more experienced in the hypnagogic side of things than the hypnopompic, so falling asleep in the stage 1 asleep versus like coming out of a dream where it breaks down in hypnopompia. But anyway, I've always considered like accessing those states while being lucidly aware as basically being the same thing as lucid dreaming. I mean, to me, it's always been like the exact same mental muscles getting worked. So because, this is not an illusory phenomenon, or it is a lot easier to access than a classic lucid dream is, getting into the stage 1 hypnagogic state and staying there lucidly aware and exploring it and trying to influence it, really to me was the exact same mental muscles I was using within a lucid dream to maintain control and stay in there. Also, the same skills you pick up on the hypnopompic side, I feel helped me a lot in the hypnagogic side. So the waking up side helped me a lot in the hypnopompic side when I'm waking up out of a dream, where I've gotten very good at being able to see the dream break down into hypnopompia and then building it back together into a regular solid, REM type dream, and then keeping the dream going if, I don't feel like I'm done doing my shit yet.